Okay. Here comes some folks. Welcome, welcome, everybody. As we have everyone joining us, oh yeah, good. Here comes plenty of folks. As we have everyone joining us, my name is Nick Hool. I am the Director of Client Engagement here at the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative, and I'll be kind of running point for the Q&A section of this today. So if you have any questions throughout the conversation, please enter those into the chat or the Q&A function. We'll be monitoring both, and I'll read those out about halfway through the conversation to Gary and our guest Bree Langemo. But as everyone is joining us, if you wouldn't mind chiming in with your name, where you're calling in from, and what interests you about this conversation. We're always looking to make these adaptive and interactive as best we can. And Bree, I see you said hi everyone, but that went to just us, the hosts. So thank you. Yeah, so if folks could chime in, I'll get that conversation started.
Hi, Greg. Hey, where you coming from, Greg? Tom Pacioretty, there he is. Welcome, Tom.
There he is. Hi, Tom. Great to see you.
Yep.
Yeah, I see some other familiar names anyway in the participant list here. Jeremy Morris, recently trained facilitator, doing some great things in Decatur, Illinois.
Yep.
Frank Hamilton, great to see you.
Yep. We got some liberal arts folks on the line.
Oh yeah,
that's fabulous. Clint Day's here. Great.
Clint Day, awesome. Darlene from Bowie, that's great. Great to have you with us, Darlene. That's awesome.
Yep. And Jack Schmidt from John Carroll, awesome. Jackie Schmidt, sorry. That's awesome. That's right in my backyard.
Oh yeah, I'm in Cleveland Heights and Gary's in Menor, so we're well familiar with John Carroll.
University of North Carolina, Pembroke. And Bree, by the way, Tom Pacioretty is making a coffee table book of Ice House reflections, like student reflections.
That's so cool.
Yeah, he keeps sending me these texts and whatnot about like, here's another one, like it's going in like the coffee table book outcome. So I'm sure, yeah, he'll have a lot to say.
Oh, I love it. Love seeing all these great people on here. Lots of friends from the past. So good to see all these familiar names and some new names as well.
Yeah,
definitely. Well, while we are letting other folks join us, I'll just say another couple things. We are recording this, as you heard when you joined. So we'll be sending out that recording along with any other relevant links that we talk about during the conversation as a follow-up, usually within 24 hours of the presentation. So you can look for that tomorrow afternoon or morning, wherever you may be. Yeah.
Awesome. Lots of familiar faces here, or familiar names here, I should say. Lots of new folks, names I'm not familiar with. Yeah. Karen in British Columbia, Humanities Washington State. That's awesome. We got Tom here from Northampton Community College. That's a familiar Bree, that's familiar to both of us. Northampton, done some work there. Stephen Taylor, London, Kentucky. Hi, Stephen. Great to have you back.
Hi, Stephen.
Yeah, good to see folks here from Eckerd as well. Thank you, Clinton.
A couple of my Concordia folks on the line. Thanks for joining us, colleagues.
Missouri S&T, Bonnie Bachman, 80% STEM, finding out how non-STEM is important. Awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. Steve Moore, University of North Carolina, Pembroke. Lawrence, Johns Hopkins, Whiting School. That's awesome, Lawrence. Welcome. We did our first pilot with the Ice House program at Johns Hopkins School of Education we launched in 2011.
Yep.
Johns Hopkins, they were using the Ice House program back there. Good to see.
That was pre-Bree.
That was PB, right? Yeah. Bowie State, welcome back. Yep. All right, well, Nick, you let me know whenever we're going to get going.
I'll just be turning my camera off and muting myself for the first part of the conversation. But folks, please feel free to chime in with thoughts at any time during this. I'll be popping in whenever there's some engagement in the chat to read any questions or comments that you all have to contribute to the conversation.
Great. Thanks.
So without further ado, Gary, take the wheel.
All right, let's go. So welcome, everyone. My name is Gary Schoniger. I'm the founder and CEO of the Entrepreneurial Learning Initiative. We're focused on entrepreneurial mindset, education, training, and development for academic institutions, organizations, and nonprofit institutions, organizations worldwide. I am really, really excited to have this conversation today with a good friend and former colleague, Bree Langemo. So Bree, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. So excited to be here and see all the awesome people on the line. And I'm looking forward to some great questions throughout our time together.
Yeah. So Bree, let's just start from the beginning. We met, I think, in 2012, maybe 2013, I forgot, when you came to the Kauffman Foundation. You were a dean at a college in Colorado. You came to a training that we did at the Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, and that was sort of your introduction to entrepreneurship education. Can you just tell us a little bit about like your background and how your career, your interest, how it intersected with entrepreneurship?
Yeah, thanks, Gary. When I was the Dean of Business, Public Service, and Social Sciences at Pikes Peak Community College, I thought it was interesting that we didn't have entrepreneurship curriculum. Now, I'm an attorney and an accountant, so I actually didn't really know much about entrepreneurship except, largely the preconceived notions of what I thought it was. I just thought it was interesting that we had a business school without programming. And I was told, well, we did have it. It was deactivated due to low enrollment. And so I was really fortunate because a local philanthropist handed me your book, Gary, who owns the Ice House. And he was a big fan of yours and read the book. And I remember him saying, well, I'm going to bring this guy, Gary, in and would the college executive team like to meet with him and hear from him? And my president at the time said, what did you think when you read the book? And I said, absolutely, we should go hear what he has to say. And so I think at that point, when I first heard you, I could really see the connection between what could potentially help students be successful and engage students. I'd been kind of chipping away at that problem for 10 years. In the community college world, there's quite a bit of attrition fall to fall. You can lose 50% of students. And I'd worked on a number of initiatives with other foundations like Lumina Foundation and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to try to move the needle on student persistence. And a lot of what you were saying, it was just a different approach to entrepreneurship. And we were then funded to go to the Kauffman Foundation to become certified in entrepreneurial mindset. And kind of after attending that training, whereas I thought we would build this programming in the business school, we really saw the need for it with all students, and then launched a pilot with first year students as a required course, sort of a first year experience course. And so I think when I first met you in my introduction to entrepreneurship, whereas I thought I was kind of looking for this cutting edge curriculum to be offered in business school, I just saw it being a much more critical solution to student engagement and solving a much larger problem that we were seeing in higher education.
Yeah. That's really that's our big challenge, Bree, is trying to get people to understand entrepreneurship beyond just the entry level, like what's your immediate, you hear the word entrepreneur, you think, oh, this is for someone who wants to start a business. And we tend to think of it in this binary way. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, so that belongs in the business school, and everyone else, it's irrelevant for everyone else. And that's what, we're forever struggling to do, is to articulate the entrepreneurial mindset in a way that people grasp the broader implications beyond just the startup world.
Absolutely. And I think, you really need to plant the seeds of entrepreneurial thinking in order to start producing entrepreneurs. Students don't often self-select as entrepreneurs. And so when we deactivated the program, we weren't really having students self-select into it. But once we kind of start planting these seeds at an introductory level in education, then the demand grew. Then we were quick to create this entrepreneurship program so students then could kind of go in and launch their ideas. But they needed the seeds planted and understand it in a broader way that they could embrace beyond just starting a business, because that's not what everyone does.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that I think entrepreneurship is like fascinating on so many different levels, but that's just me talking. But it's also interesting to me, like why the program would be canceled because there's no interest. And I think, that in of itself is interesting to me because, what I see is that a lot of programs try to teach entrepreneurship from this sort of theoretical concept that starts with a business plan and all this market research, and it's just not really engaging. It's presented in a way that's not, first of all, doesn't reflect the reality of what a typical entrepreneur is actually doing, but it's also not very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I would liken it to a lot of first-year experience courses where you give students all the tools to be successful, but they don't even yet kind of understand like what their own vision is or why they really care about their education to even get to needing the tools or wanting to engage in the tools. And so that's, that was our thought with the first year experience courses, is how could we inspire and engage students in their own academic journey and being entrepreneurial about their education. And so I think we really broadened it. I remember coming to you and saying, this is how we're going to apply it. And you were
me
like,
saying like, whoa, that's not really what this is meant for.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so in that way though, like you saw something that I didn't see, right? I mean, I thought at that time, like Ice House was sort of a cutting edge entrepreneurship program that was meant, to sort of democratize entrepreneurship. But really, you were the one that saw the bigger thing that I initially resisted. I'm almost embarrassed to say.
Yeah, we ran that pilot at Pikes Peak so successfully that we ended up creating the Ice House Student Success Program at Eli. And now I don't know how many institutions it's in, but I remember years ago, it was like one of the leading products of the Ice House programming. So, it was a solution for more people beyond Pikes Peak.
Right. But just to dig into the details a little bit for the people who are not familiar, like you saw this as like sort of a student, you had been working to improve student engagement and student persistence in the community college space. You were working with all these big foundations to try to do this. You saw our version of entrepreneurship education, i.e. the Ice House program, as a tool that might be able to impact. And my initial response was, whoa, slow down a minute. Like that's not really what it was meant for.
Yeah.
And you, persisted in because you have an entrepreneurial mindset, but you persisted and really the outcome of that, of using our entrepreneurial mindset program, Ice House, as a student success program. Really, I remember that we were all astonished by the outcomes of that. Can you talk a little bit about that? I don't want to make this into an Ice House infomercial.
No, yeah. And we got to get to the liberal arts too, right? Because that's what everybody's on for. But we saw a 10% reduction in student attrition. And what that really meant was in the beginning weeks of college for freshmen, we had 10% less students drop out of college. And that we hadn't seen numbers like that with other initiatives. And not only that, but they went on the next semester to be even more successful. And I think with Edmonds Community College gathered some really interesting data too, in tracking those students throughout their college career, having higher GPAs, and just overall retention was very high compared to the students who hadn't gone through the program. So there's a lot of data that showed by engaging students in an entrepreneurial mindset at the onset of their academic journey, it did drive student engagement because it really kind of helped students think about how they could be entrepreneurial with their own education, right? So we had one student who ended up kind of saying like, well, now when I'm taking marketing, I need that class because I'm trying to solve a problem relating to like the Ice House project that he was working on. So he was able to he was much more engaged in his academics as a result, because he needed the education to reach a goal. And it was just a different level of engagement that we saw.
Yeah. But I remember when like you started to come back to me and saying, hey, Gary, there's something really interesting happening here. And I remember coming out to Colorado Springs and talking to students, and this is sort of my segue into the liberal arts. But the students were saying, like, they were sort of angry at first. Like, why am I being forced to take an entrepreneurship? I'm not a business major. I have no interest in entrepreneurship. But then once they got a look at it, they were saying like, wow, whoa, wait a minute. This is super interesting.
Yeah.
And you know, as you just pointed out, that they became more engaged in learning, more broadly speaking, which is, you know, something I have to give you credit for recognizing that. So can you just like fast forward and talk about like how you grabbed a hold of this and what you're doing? And, you know, I suppose I should say for people who aren't familiar with you, we were lucky to have you as the president of Eli for I think about 4 years. And you actually helped develop a student success version of the Ice House program and kind of bring us out of the dark ages there. And for that, I'll always be grateful. But can you talk a little bit about the work you're doing now and how you're bringing entrepreneurial mindset education into a liberal arts domain?
Yeah. Well, my time with Eli was amazing because I got to work with so many different higher education institutions, and everyone adopts entrepreneurial thinking in different ways to solve different problems at their institution. There's no one way to do this. Sometimes it happens kind of at the top level with administrators and wanting kind of entrepreneurial leadership, professional development, or just, you know, directly in certain faculty classrooms, or more pervasive and through one course that touches all students. So there's so many, you know, great ways that people implement entrepreneurship at their institution. When I moved home to my my hometown of Fargo Moorehead in 2018, I was fortunate to meet Dean Chris Mason at Concordia College that fall, not long after we had moved home, and was really looking for like to really root in locally. My husband's CEO of the Greater Fargo Moorhead Economic Development Corporation, and we really wanted to contribute to our community. And as you know, Gary, we've been flying all over the world, South Africa, and a lot of time in Mexico, and I'd say Canada, but since I was deported, I don't think I can officially claim that. That's another webinar.
Yeah.
Or refer to a panel that I did in Mexico where there's conversation about that. But anyway, you know, so looking to really kind of root in locally, and was looking for some adjunct, you know, teaching in business law. And so, but I told Chris my background with Eli, and he is an entrepreneur, and he philosophically just 100% agreed with everything that I was saying. It was really what he wanted to see at Concordia College. And he kind of hired me immediately as a contractor to help develop the curriculum at Concordia. So super great experience to like get to be at the ground up of being a part of a faculty team that built the curriculum. And Concordia College is a liberal arts institution founded by Norwegian immigrants and has a long-standing history. We have a School of Health Professions, the School of Arts and Sciences, and then the Offutt School of Business, which is a little different for a liberal arts institution to have kind of that science focus as well, I guess, or the health professions in the business school as well. Anyway, so just to get back to kind of building the curriculum, we started with a certificate, an entrepreneurial mindset certificate to complement any major at Concordia, very interdisciplinary, but it's made up of entrepreneurial mindset, which uses the Ice House entrepreneurship program, a design thinking course where they kind of get into prototyping an idea, and then an entrepreneurial marketing course focused on kind of storytelling and branding and advocating for an idea. So we have a good number of students. In fact, in 2019, when we launched, we had 10 students. In 2020, we grew it to 65 students. And then in 2021, we've had 86 students that's just the entrepreneurial mindset course. That doesn't even kind of acknowledge the certificate and then entrepreneurship minors that we have at the college, but you can see how quickly it's grown. And this last year, just for students declaring entrepreneurship as a minor, we grew by another 20 students. These numbers seem small, but Concordia is a 2,000 student institution. So just to understand, when we launched it, like, that's pretty great engagement to kick it off. 15 of the students who declared the minor were freshmen. We had high school students who were coming to our entrepreneurship club meeting last year, and now are officers as freshmen at Concordia. It's just been interesting to see this younger generation really excited about entrepreneurship as part of their experience. They're coming from all this different disciplines, from, music, a lot of music students. We now have a bachelor's in music and entrepreneurship at Concordia that we just launched. World languages, nutrition, health science, social work, education, like just very, very interdisciplinary. Those are students taking the certificate. If they want to get to actually launching idea, then they get into the entrepreneurship minor.
So that's super exciting. How quickly the students are embracing the idea. But we often see resistance to entrepreneurship in higher ed. More broadly speaking. Before we get into that, though, Bree, I wanted, can you at least attempt to articulate where entrepreneurship fits in the liberal arts? Why? I mean, I think that seems antithetical to some people. If you think of it as a business discipline, it seems sort of antithetical to the liberal arts. But you and I have talked about this ad nauseum, but it's actually a perfect fit if you understand it at least the mindset.
I think entrepreneurial mindset and liberal arts just completely go hand in hand. I think entrepreneurial mindset adds more value to a liberal arts institution, because the entrepreneurial part, which is, you can think like an entrepreneur, but how do you add value and be useful in the world? And that's when you think about liberal arts degrees, it's kind of that next step. I think with a liberal arts mindset, but now how do I use that to create value and become useful? And when you think about liberal arts kind of outcomes, right? Creative, critical thinking, problem solving, communication skills, right? That's all what it means to be a successful entrepreneur as well. Those are outcomes of an entrepreneurial mindset. But at the core of the entrepreneurial mindset is really, how do I align my interest, skills, and abilities with the needs of others to solve problems in the world, which is also an outcome of a liberal arts education. There's this whole kind of, contributing to society, right? And being an engaged citizen as an outcome. And that's the core of the entrepreneurial mindset that just so perfectly aligns with a liberal arts education.
Yeah, I love what you just said, Bree. It's about finding that intersection between what you're naturally interested in, what you're capable of becoming good at, and pursuing those your interests and abilities in a way that contribute to the greater good. I'm forever saying that's where optimal engagement happens. And so, how do we get folks to understand entrepreneurship, the benefits of entrepreneurship beyond just this traditional, this is a business skill. And that's forever frustrating to me.
Yeah. I think too, great, Gary, I was just going to interrupt there just to say, to bridge that, you have to actually know and talk to entrepreneurs. One of the values of the ISOS program is it embeds real world entrepreneurs from all different backgrounds. And you never hear them saying, I always wanted to start a business to make a bunch of money. They were always compelled to solve a problem that they cared about. And that kind of evolved into now to reach more people, to solve more problems, I have to start a business. But you don't have to necessarily start a business. There's all kinds that you could do. Start a nonprofit, you could do a social enterprise, and there's all different ways to then elevate your problem solving to other people. But they technically just have to kind of go that route in order to reach more people. It's just a logistical next step, but it's not the reason that they were compelled to get in, that they are an entrepreneur. You never hear them say that.
Right. And it's so interesting because so many, I've interviewed hundreds of these everyday entrepreneurs all over the world. And like so many of them start the conversation by saying, I never really thought of myself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right? They're responding to some sort of an adaptive pressure, you know, and they pop up one day and go, I guess this is what being an entrepreneur is, but they don't start out with that natural, that like sort of conscious intention.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I put some framework here in the chat, the idea of entrepreneurial mindset theory, which I'm working on, but, you know, I think to your point, Bree, I think that entrepreneurial people unwittingly stumble into the trifecta of engagement, of optimal engagement, of optimal motivation. They're pursuing something that's interesting to them in a way that benefits the greater good. And by doing that, they become optimally engaged.
Absolutely. And I think that's what the higher education experience should be, is like a laboratory, an exploration ground for students to kind of figure that out about themselves. Like, what is it? Where do they find themselves in flow? What are they most curious about? Where have they created value in the past that they'd like to run with? And just kind of creating that space for them to really explore their own curiosities. It's what I love about a liberal arts education. I just think the entrepreneurial mindset really pluses it up, because it's like, okay, now go contribute to the world. Now find ways to create value. However you do that, maybe you want to work for an employer, maybe you want to be an independent contractor, maybe you want to start something up. That's just the mechanism for, you know, giving your gifts to the world.
That's it, Bree. You got it. That's so well said. Like, man, you just said it right there. And I think people need to get that. Like, starting a business is but one way to manifest your gifts to the world. I mean, that's really the idea. The biggest underneath all of this, that's what we're trying to encourage. And you know, I know you're familiar with Jaime Casap's idea of like, stop asking kids what they want to be when they grow up and start asking them what problems they want to solve and what they need to learn in order to solve those problems. So, you know, I have a friend who's a retired restaurateur now working in regenerative farming in St. Petersburg near Concordia College. I think he's working with FSU, and he's like teaching like third graders about like regenerative farming. And he showed up one day and asked these third graders, like, what problems do you want to solve? And he said the kids just all sprang to life. They were all started talking about problems they wanted to solve.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I actually found this in some obscure writing of Karl Marx, but like, the desire to fulfill human needs through our own effort is part of what makes us human. Like, that's in every one of us. It's not just in some of us.
Yeah.
And when we don't get to do that in our work, we become disengaged. Right?
Yeah.
And you and I've talked about this, you know, at length, but you know, if you look at the data, like Gallup publishes about student engagement, it's not good. 2/3 of students leave high school not engaged in learning. 2/3 of workers in North America are not engaged in their work.
Yeah.
And then when you juxtapose that against entrepreneurial minded people, they're optimally engaged. And so that's part of the work that you and I are both trying to do, is try to figure out like what we can learn about entrepreneurship that we can apply to the classroom.
Yeah.
To our organizational structure that can elicit that level of engagement. I mean, I think that's the big kahuna.
Gary, I want to make sure to share a little bit about this inquiry seminar I'm teaching at Concordia College. We have an inquiry seminar where students are considered co-inquirers of an innovative topic that a faculty is passionate about. It's broad ranging. It could be about baseball or food, and of course, you know, I've offered one on the entrepreneurial mindset and exploring it. But the great part about it is, since the students are co-inquirers with me, they're doing research and kind of running with things that they're really curious about. So right now, they're studying, like really digging into like intrinsic motivation and where that comes from. So they're reading like Deci and Ryan, or reading some of these academic papers to kind of figure out like what is intrinsic motivation, or what is having agency or locus of control or self-efficacy. and how do we continue to develop it? Because those are, I tell them, like, while they have to kind of focus on a construct behind the entrepreneurial mindset, they can run in any direction. And it is so fascinating when you let students run. At first, they're like, what? The self-direction is a little uneasy. Like, I just want you to tell me what to do. I'm like, well, here's the parameters of the output, but really, like, you get to choose. You're co-inquirer. I'm going to learn from you now. And it's awesome. Like, that's the kind of student engagement that you want to see in a classroom. And I'm learning so much from them. And so for our audience, our inquiry seminar is like a first year experience, kind of, I guess. They're kind of getting introduced to the world of scholarship and research, but through, faculty chosen topics.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of the comments here, and we're going to get, there's a lot of great comments popping in here. I'm really anxious to get in here, but a lot of educators come to us at Eli and say, I really love what you're doing, but can you call it something other than entrepreneurship?
Yeah.
And that's so interesting to me. And some people, I served on the Dean's Council at Purdue Polytechnic, and one of the guys there, one of the dean or the people on the Dean's Council said, stop, just talk about innovation, stop talking about entrepreneurship. Like, why does that make people so nervous?
Yeah.
And I'm not really sure, but my answer has always been no, because I think innovation is the problem finding, problem solving component. But the entrepreneurial component is the advocacy of the idea. It's the midwifery. I mean, ideas don't sell themselves. They need champions. They need avatars to kind of bring them into the world, right?
You don't get to innovation without an entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah. And ideas are a dime a dozen. I mean, let's face it,
Yeah. It was interesting in my inquiry class when students decided on the problems they wanted to solve and then presented on it. I couldn't believe the passion in the classroom and some of the other students saying, like, you have to implement that. You have to go solve that. That needs to be solved.
Right.
Yeah.
And it just elicits a much, much higher level of engagement. So, and maybe I'll use that for a segue. Like, before we went live on this webinar, you asked a really interesting question, and I don't know if I know the answer. Maybe you don't either. Maybe we can pose it for the audience. But I was asking, the question you asked was, I don't know how you framed it, but like, what is it about entrepreneurship that's so intriguing, like so infectious, so engaging? Like, what?
Yeah, I stop and think about this because I've spent about a decade now. I've been in higher ed over 15 years. I don't know, maybe going on 20. I lost count, but now over like going on a decade, entrepreneurship has been a huge focus. I mean, I speak in the community of the Chamber of Commerce and do different webinars, and now I'm, writing papers on it. And how did my career end up shifting from like accounting and being an attorney to being an administrator and higher education leader?
Yeah.
I thought I was going to be college president, but now here I am. I'm just like still so passionate about entrepreneurship. And it's not
when you think of accountant and lawyer, you think of like this polar opposite of an entrepreneur in a lot of ways.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
And I think maybe most relatable to me kind of early on with hearing you define entrepreneurship in a more like in a broader way was, I know I've always been entrepreneurial. I look for entrepreneurial people around me. Like, those are the people I want to work with. It's more about, creating entrepreneurials than just entrepreneurs. But because my husband's also in economic development, I'm like, people, we have to drive entrepreneurship. We need more entrepreneurs. When all net new jobs are coming from entrepreneurs, somehow we've got to sprinkle those seeds and get to that outcome, even though it's not the only outcome. But really, everyone needs to be entrepreneurial. And so when people talk about, don't use that word entrepreneurship, it's not relatable, it's hard to say, it makes me uncomfortable, I have kind of bad notions about it. It reminds me of like kind of greedy businessmen or profit seekers or whatever. But then you start reading or following World Economic Forum, and everything they say is entrepreneurship for over a decade now, entrepreneurship being a life skill. And, that language is there. I don't think we have to find ways, unfortunately, to become more comfortable with entrepreneurship by redefining it, which is what Eli does such a great job of. But I do find myself sometimes just pausing and saying, what is that hook in me with entrepreneurial mindset? Why did that hook so deeply? And it's not just me, because I see Tom and Steven and Frank and all these familiar people on this call. They're still tuning in and listening. So you're still compelled by it too. Have you thought about what hooks you with it? I think initially for me is I saw it as a solution to student engagement, human engagement. It grew to be that kind of broad, even beyond the classroom. And Gary, you and I've seen as doing trainings all over the world people make major life decisions after going through that training sometimes. Yep. They realize they're not being entrepreneurial with their own lives. It is really life-changing. And for our students too, they get an opportunity to kind of pause and see how they want to contribute to the world. But there's something really compelling about it that is worth more examination, I think.
Oh, totally. And I have not got it all figured out, but I tried to articulate this in my entrepreneurial mindset theory that I dumped here in the chat a minute ago. But I think, Bree, this kind of goes back to the humanities, but I think, we've lost sight of the fact that this humanism, this humanistic aspect of entrepreneurship, the innate, what Carl Rogers, I think, or Kurt Goldstein called it, the master motivator, the desire and tendency to become all that we can become. That's in every living organism, right? Yeah. We're like all acorns trying to become oak trees.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I'm seeing more even academic papers about this now, Bree, about the eudaimonic benefits of entrepreneurship. We've all, it's quite easy to recognize the economic benefits.
Yeah.
The jobs created, the revitalization, and so on and so forth. But people are now starting to recognize the developmental benefits, the individual resilience, the resourcefulness, the ability to adapt and thrive amidst, complexity. I'm starting to believe that one should focus entrepreneurial mindset education on the developmental benefits, and the economic will take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Rather than just trying to focus on making money. And as you've said, so many entrepreneurs, they're starting out to solve a problem.
Right.
And we could go on and on about this, but
Gary, this is where everybody's going to get a tour of my house, because my puppy just locked himself in my office. He's crying. I've got a 6-month-old puppy who's actually been very good for this call, but he somehow managed to lock himself in there. So,
as puppy dogs do.
Looks like Nick is intervening here with some great questions.
I just wanted to, like Gary mentioned, there's plenty of good comments, so I wanted to make sure we had a chance to hear some of those out. Unless, was there anything else that you all wanted to talk about regarding the question of what is it that hooks us, or maybe we can just leave that for folks to chime in on.
Let me just, I would love to hear other people's perspective, but I guess I didn't quite land my point, Nick. It's that we're all striving to become all that we can become. And yet a lot of us feel trapped. And when we could become exposed to this, we see entrepreneurship as a mechanism or a way that we can self-actualize. It's a way that we can fully express ourselves.
Yeah, that's kind of a great landing point. I think when I think about entrepreneurial mindset, like those who are entrepreneurially minded, we're always thinking of ways to stretch ourselves too, or we always know we're not actually at our optimal. Like we're always trying to get there. Like we always think like, oh, maybe it's, I always wanted to write a book, or I always wanted to, you keep pushing yourself. But not only that is like, thinking of your own kind of vision and then manifesting it, we can really create our own situations more than ever before. Like we live in a world that offers us so much opportunity to create a situation that we want if we only feel confident enough to actually try for it, right? To believe in ourselves that we actually could do that. That's the self-efficacy component behind entrepreneurial people. They believe somewhere along the line that they had the right to try, right? Or the confidence to try. And that's, in any field, it's the same thing. It's like, why not? Why couldn't you at least try? You might fail, but at least you don't know, and it could actualize. And a lot of times you can kind of manifest that into creation.
Right. And just to piggyback on what you're saying, and we'll go to questions. I agree with you, Bree, that we're probably living in the most opportunity-rich time in human history. But these opportunities they're latent. They're present, but they're not visible. They're not like pieces of fruit hanging on a tree. They require discovery skills. And those are skills that most of us have never really been exposed to. To learn how to navigate ambiguity and complexity and uncertainty without the guidance of a professional teacher with a predictable outcome and an established curriculum, which again is why it's so perfect for the liberal arts.
And we don't often hold that space for students to develop those opportunity recognition skills of discovery, of like going down a path and realizing through talking to people, through getting out of the classroom, that there are so many opportunities, but it requires those conversations that you have to pursue. And just one more plug for Concordia, because I feel like we're heading in such a strong direction with our peak experiences, which are pivotal experiences and applied knowledge, and students are required to complete 2 to graduate. And we'll have one with entrepreneurship minor, startup peak. And I think that gives students the opportunity to get out of the traditional classroom, right? And really apply what they're learning so that they can discover more through actual experience.
Yep, absolutely.
Awesome.
Nick, let her rip with the questions. I'll try to.
Definitely. I'll give you a couple softballs first, just to ease into this. So Bree, I know you're at Concordia College, Moorehead, but there are other Concordia campuses that I believe are, sister schools or connected in some way through a system. So Dr. Kathleen Greiner was asking, is there any chance that this program is going to roll out to any or all of the other Concordia campuses?
Yeah, that is actually common confusion, but Concordia College, we only have our one campus in Moorehead, Minnesota. We're not connected to the other Concordia institutions. We do have Concordia language villages in Bemidji, which is world renowned. So that's kind of a cool deal as well to check out. But no, we don't have any affiliation with the other.
Okay, no, that's
often confused. So
for sure. In fact, I think we've talked to some of the other Concordias, and I've been like, I wonder if they're connected. So thank you for the clarification. And then another quick, easy one. Clint Day was asking, generally speaking, what is or was the traditional objective of liberal arts curriculum before we talk about all of this entrepreneurial mindset additional feedback?
Yeah, I think it depends on the institution and kind of their core curriculum. I mean, generally speaking, liberal arts tends to be kind of focused on those creative, critical thinking, problem solving, kind of those typical general education requirements. But our core at Concordia, it goes by the acronym BREW, be responsibly engaged in the world. And I love that because I think entrepreneurial mindset has such a humanistic outlook to it. Like you are looking to like, how do your skills solve problems for other people? There's real humanism in that. And how can you contribute to the world in a meaningful and useful way? So it kind of depends. We're looking at our core curriculum right now, moving toward engaged citizenship, which to me is like not too far off from like where we actually were, but maybe a bit more intentional. So every liberal arts institution probably has like a little bit different of a core focus. Sometimes they have themes. Yeah, so it just depends on the institution, but the actual like kind of the generally liberal arts are just so aligned with entrepreneurship. And like I said, I just think entrepreneurship adds an extra kind of step. And I'll give one more example of what I mean by that is
Sure.
I'm a founding board member for a nonprofit called You Code Girl. And You Code Girl could have been focused on computing skills alone, but the founder, Betty Groneberg, combined that with entrepreneurial mindset because she didn't want girls just to have the technical computing skills, but to empower them to be entrepreneurial then to go out in the world and create value. So that's just kind of like one example, how it adds value.
Yeah, that's great. And I loved what you said too about the general principles of liberal arts education don't necessarily have as pointed a path forward for the students. So the entrepreneurial mindset kind of infusion that you all are doing in Concordia really just leads to this engaged citizenship, which is, like you say, pretty close to what you are already doing, but with a direct intentionality to it. And that intentionality is so key. And it's a piece that a lot of organizations, both educational and otherwise, are missing. What is the point of what we're doing here? And you all are kind of putting a flag in the stand and making that claim. And I love it. That's great.
I would add too, like, think about like the future of education and what kind of graduates we'll need to produce as automation is coming into play and taking away kind of more of the technical skills required and some of the menial tasks, right? And we're going to require more human skills of people. Well, entrepreneurship really kind of drives empathy, vulnerability, right? You have to be vulnerable and willing to like micro experiment with an idea. You have to have empathy to listen to people and really hear what they're saying the problem is. Like all those human skills come out of entrepreneurship, which is going to be so critical as we look at what will human work be in the future. Well, it's going to be more focused on human skills.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Kathleen, Dr. Brown just put in there, like soft skills. And I was just piggyback on that, Bree, that we were talking to Tony Wagner in the same webinar earlier this year. And he kept talking about the skills gap. And I think part of what's missing from the skills gap is the problems that we're facing are not technical, they're adaptive. And we're not going to be able to solve the problem with just new technical skills are maybe a short-term fix, but it's the adaptability that's the real gem of entrepreneurship education, is the adaptability that emerges from it. And I think
like Laszlo Bock, said when they were interviewing, when he was senior VP of people at Google, what they were really looking for, their number one skill set was learning agility. That's where the skills come in. Like, yeah, we're always going to have to learn new skills. That's going to be nonstop through our whole life, but we have to have a sense of learning agility to be able to quickly do that and figure out how to do that and to want to do that. That's, we've traditionally called that lifelong learning. So that like kind of passion for learning, but being agile with it, of understanding however we can get those new skills to keep tooling up. It's just going to keep happening.
And if I could be so bold, Bree, to piggyback on what you're saying, I think, which is why entrepreneurship education, entrepreneurial mindset education is so perfectly suited for liberal arts, because the fundamental shift that I think needs to occur is one from an external to an internal locus of control. Right? I mean, we don't realize from the moment we set foot in school as children, we quickly learn that someone else has figured out what we need to learn in order to be successful in life. And people ask me sometimes, Gary, tell me specifically what is an entrepreneurial mindset? And sometimes the best way to answer that is with the question, what is a non-entrepreneurial mindset? Right? It's someone else is going to tell me what I need to learn and do in order to be successful. That worked for a minute, 50 years ago. But that's the fundamental shift, which is my view why entrepreneurial mindset education is ideally suited.
And I think I couldn't help myself and I opened up the chat, but I shouldn't do that because I start reading. I think it was Karen.
Yeah.
I think it was Karen who said that, entrepreneurial mindset helps students advocate for themselves. And that's exactly it, because they have to be able to articulate how they can contribute value and be useful, right? To get these opportunities where in whatever scenario it might be in, but they have a better self-understanding and what it is and how they're able to contribute and be useful in the world.
Well, that's let me kind of add a layer on top of that, Bree. I've been thinking about this just very recently. That the World Economic Forum. Let's go back to them. They're saying things like we need to support entrepreneurship at all levels of society in all sectors, and it needs to shift from the perimeter to the core of the way education operates. And entrepreneurship education initiatives have popped up everywhere. Yet we still seem to be stuck on the perimeter. And I think it's because we're trying to adopt entrepreneurship within the context of more of an industrialized, like top-down bureaucratic way of thinking. And in a lot of ways, they're antithetical. They're not mutually exclusive. But if you start to look at the literature around complexity and complexity leadership, you need both. There's an entrepreneurial side and there's a managerial side. You need to honor both. And so far, we've just sort of focused on, 250 years of obsession with efficiency has come at great expense to our ability to develop, to survive in complexity, to be the creative critical thinking. And it's difficult to teach creativity and critical thinking in the context of routinized other directed learning or work.
Awesome. A quick comment from Karen that Bree, I kind of wanted your take on, because we've definitely heard this from other educators, but that's a big part of the disengagement that she's seeing comes from students having been told from the beginning to focus on a strict career path and courses that are clearly linked to a job in that career path. So can you talk a little bit about how that's shifting with your new student engagement in the entrepreneurship minor?
Yeah, I think, we're seeing more and more entrepreneurship kind of complementing any major and seeing that language. Certainly we had that thinking at Pikes Peak as well. So even if they were on like a culinary arts, trajectory or auto diesel, that entrepreneurship, education would certainly help those graduates as well. So yeah, I don't, it's interesting because I've come from a huge background of community college and now I'm in a liberal arts institution and certainly see the value of both. And we work very, very closely with M-State, our 2-year partner, in transfer and articulation. But it is interesting because we go through these phases, right? Like previously it was like this huge push for all this technical education, but now it's kind of like, have we pigeonholed people to, into like one career track that maybe is not going to exist at some point. So I think, that's the value of combining entrepreneurship with any major, I think. Even if you're not going to become an entrepreneur, you're going to need to be entrepreneurial. But it does come back to kind of the core of liberal arts education too, is like that interdisciplinary approach to your education and thinking broadly and working with different disciplines to solve problems. And I saw that Stephen Taylor put an excellent quote in there about the core of liberal arts, because I think that's spot on. And I actually haven't, I don't know in this chat if people have talked about resistance across institutions to entrepreneurship. Maybe I'm really super fortunate because I was at the kind of ground running with helping to establish the curriculum and the philosophical approach, which was already there. Like Concordia already had that philosophy. Dean Chris Mason already had that kind of philosophy. So the curriculum wasn't a struggle. And largely the people that we've trained in entrepreneurial mindset have come from other disciplines. We've trained a handful of business faculty, but it was the same at Pikes Peak, right? We had a huge engagement from philosophy and English and communications departments. So I think it depends, like actually you might be in more problems. I saw a comment in there too, not that I'm trying to just like briefly see as they pop up, but if you have an established program in entrepreneurship in a business school, you actually might have more of a challenge of broadening it.
Yep, that's
I
right.
think I could see that as a challenge because there may be some territorial threat there.
Well, that's where entrepreneurship goes to die. But the broader the thinking behind what you just said, Bree, and the comment in the chat that you responded to, is that what folks don't always realize is that the attitudes and skills required to discover opportunities are distinct from the attitudes and skills required to exploit that opportunity. Of course, the former being entrepreneurial skills and the latter being managerial skills. And the wheels start to fall off the wagon when we conflate those two. And I my pitch to the business school is like, this is non-denominational learning. This is interdisciplinary. And if we do it right, people will be beating down the doors of the business school, but that's not where it should begin.
It's sort of like a transformation theory. And for those of you who've been in Gary's training, right? Like you need to know what phase you're in to know the rules of survival. They all have a place. None of them are irrelevant. You just need to know like kind of the timing of it, right? Like if you don't plant enough entrepreneurial seeds across students of all disciplines, like they might not get to your door to think about how to actually launch an idea or think about venture planning. They need the space to kind of cultivate an idea, figure out how to advocate for an idea, and figure out how to micro experiment with an idea. And sometimes if you have a really strongly established entrepreneurship program, it's been too maybe focused on like finding the best idea, investing in the best ideas, doing the pitch competitions and whatnot, without like that learning laboratory for entrepreneurship, that exploration phase, and really understanding what it means to think entrepreneurially, and not just from theory based, but like a curriculum that actually really fully engages actual real world entrepreneurs in the education. So students can hear from them and relate to them. That's the self-efficacy part of it. It has to be socially relatable models.
Yeah. And Bree, there's what I'm trying to put forth is a concept that I'm calling entrepreneurial discovery learning, EDL. And that's what's missing is discovery learning. And that concept is not new. There's a scholar named Jerome Brunner. I think he's passed away, but and Nick, I don't know if you can find that paper in time. I think, Bree, you would really enjoy it. But one of the things Brunner talks about in discovery learning is developing the heuristics of discovery. Just the basic, like most of us don't have those skills. We've got delivery skills. We went through this formal education process where knowledge was transferred to us. But we don't really know what it's like to go out in the wild and discover something unknown, previously unknown. And Brunner makes this point in this paper on discovery learning, which Nick, just thank you, popped it up in here.
That one's behind a paywall. I'm looking for a free one.
Okay, thank you. But what he said is that when like by discovery, like not necessarily discovering something new to mankind, it's just that you discovered it for yourself. It's a really important distinction. You're muted, Bree.
I was just agreeing.
That's great. Oh man, I had a good, and I'm all distracted looking for that paper. I had a good next one to read too. Who was it? Oh, that was it. Willie is asking about tracking this progress, the engagement of students or participants in a program in general, and how they are becoming more innovative. He asks, how are you all tracking, or how can we track or show changes in engagement from individuals who have experienced or participated in entrepreneurial training? So Bree, are you doing anything at Concordia to track students at the beginning and at the end, perhaps, a pre and post, if you will?
Well, a couple of thoughts here. If you go to Eli's website under, I think it's maybe not the research center, but there are some case studies in there. So you can kind of look at the actual data that went into the Pikes Peak study if you want to look at kind of student engagement, student attrition, and college success after. Also, there's one for Edmonds Community College. I'm not sure. I think maybe I wrote a paper for NISOT or something at one point on Edmonds. That's probably in the maybe in the blog somewhere or something like that.
Yep.
But so those are some like good, like where you have institutional effectiveness working with you on actual data gathering to gather that information. For me, I'd be interested in any of you out there who have kind of established indicators for success of your entrepreneurial programming, because I've gone down a kind of a number of different roads. Like I know Princeton Review does like the most entrepreneurial universities, and they always put out their list. And I've looked at their indicators, and to be honest, it's some of them just aren't our goal. Like we're not interested in how much students' businesses end up making, or, you know, like those kind of indicators. We're really looking at how interdisciplinary are our faculty, how interdisciplinary are our students, and, you know, different like other engagement points. Like for example, with the Entrepreneurship Club, we created an entrepreneurship passport for if they engage of 5 different entrepreneurial activities, and then we can kind of know and track that level of engagement. Typically stems from students who are in entrepreneurial mindset course. So engaging in entrepreneurial activity on campus and then out in the community is something that we're interested in. Student engagement isn't as big of a challenge at Concordia as we saw in the community college world. And I'll say, that's because our students are living on campus. They've got this great sense of community. It's not a commuter campus like community colleges tend to be. While they are working different jobs, just, you know, kind of the average community college student might have a family they're taking care of. They might have jobs. They have other things going on. They're commuting to campus. So it's, you know, there's other life variables where our students fortunately come into campus getting to put their head in the academic game. And like I said, they are working, but it's not, you know, we have a really high graduation rate. We have really high student persistence. And so I'm not trying to solve kind of the same problem I was before. Now I'm looking for like, does introduction to entrepreneurial mindset increase engagement in entrepreneurial activities? Are students going on beyond entrepreneurial mindset to complete the certificate? So for example, this spring when we offer entrepreneurial marketing and I see on the first day of registration that class caps right away, that's a very high level of engagement in continuing entrepreneurship education. Those are indicators that I'm looking for. And then also just watching and kind of monitoring high school engagement with us. So when high school students are following us on Instagram, which by the way is at Cobber Entrepreneurs. So go ahead and follow us if you actually have a great event tonight with an alumni entrepreneur. And when they're following us on social media and showing up unsolicited to club meetings, and then, you know, wanting to be engaged in our club at a leadership level, their first year of college, those are some indicators that tell me that there's a hunger for this from like a younger population, that they want to go to an institution that offers entrepreneurship. And those students were, a couple of them were music students. So not your traditional, they're coming to study music and entrepreneurship combined, which we've had our school is really well known for our music program. And so that collaboration, interdisciplinary, you know, department partnership was really important and a big success at the college as well for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Nick, there's a question in here from, and I hope I'm getting the name right, but Sajad?
Oh yeah, I was actually just gonna highlight that one. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. From Trinidad, Tobago.
And they're asking, how can educators teach entrepreneurship when they haven't started a business? And one of their suggestions is entrepreneurship work by Professor Neck at Babson is one that offers some hope. But Gary, I wanted to give you the chance to maybe talk a little bit about our work and how that might differ.
Well, I think it's an important question there that, you know, I think on one hand, the first thing is to recognize that like entrepreneurship is really about discovery learning. That's really what it's about. And so, you know, there's some fundamental differences from entrepreneurship education. You can't rely on carrots and sticks. You can't rely on extrinsic motivators or threat of punishment. You have to rely on intrinsic motivation. But you also have to recognize that it's a discovery process, and you have no idea what the student is going to discover in the process. And you know, not only are you not providing the problem to solve, but you're not providing the answer either. And I think this kind of like discovery learning requires facilitation, not instruction. And I think that's where the answer lies to this really important question. You can't be an expert. Like, experts get in the way. And you know, part of what's wrong with entrepreneurship education is this over-reliance on pitch competitions that teach the students to rely on the opinions of others, of experts, rather than on empirical evidence from users. And so I you know, I don't want to be too long-winded here. I want to get other people to chime in here, but I think that's a way to think about it. It's you're guiding people through a discovery process. Number one, you don't know the answers. You're not an expert. You don't know a good idea from a bad idea. Like, acknowledge that. And then also acknowledge to the students, like, I'm going on the journey with you. I've never started a business, but we're going to go on this journey. I mean, that's another way to do it. Yes, is it good if you've started a business? Probably better if you actually started and failed at a business. It's probably more impactful than if you started and got successful right out of the gate, right? You don't learn as much when you succeed as you do when you fail, but that's a whole nother kettle of worms. It's a great question. Thank you, Sajjad, for the question.
And I would just add, as you know, as we've trained more faculty at Concordia in different disciplines with entrepreneurial mindset, is we're really looking for strong facilitators of that opportunity discovery process. You know, with opportunity discovery, it has a couple of ways that process can end, right? Like, you might move into experimenting with an idea, but it might also, the idea might die at the end of it. You might go on to a new problem to solve. So it's really about understanding the process and the skills that you're cultivating through it. And I think, you know, if people are willing to be really strong facilitators of that, and they're really willing to let go of being the expert in the classroom, right? Like, they sort of like my inquiry seminar, my students are co-inquirers with me. I don't have all the answers as we engage in an entrepreneurial process, but I'm going to inquire with them along the way. And they have a lot of self-directed opportunity and autonomy in that process. I just provide kind of the coaching support and the facilitation around it to help them kind of maybe at certain points help acknowledge like what actually came out of that, the skill set that came out of it, not just the, you know, of the problem itself, but like what kind of skills their entrepreneurial skills that they're developing in that process. So I'd say, at least at the introduction of entrepreneurship, you need to be a really good facilitator of the process.
Yeah. That's good stuff, Bree. That's really important. I mean, that's a lot of what our training is about. Our facilitator training is to help educators understand how to shift gears from the role of the subject matter expert to becoming a facilitator. And even if you do know the answer, you shouldn't be telling them. But the important point here, to come back to this, is that entrepreneurship is a learning process. It's discovery learning. And if you zoom out and look at what entrepreneurs are doing naturally, they're following the scientific method, right? And that's what they're emulating. And so, you know, they're stumbling upon a problem. They're doing some kind of background research, and then they're sort of micro experimenting. They micro experiment their way to a solution, which Brunner called, I don't know if it was Brunner, I don't know where I got this term, but it's like it's error-based learning, which is the polar opposite of the way we have been taught to learn. It's the exact opposite. And that's why, again, you know, even if you are a subject matter expert, you should stand down.
Yeah, and I would say too, like another thought that comes to mind is entrepreneurship classes absolutely should have entrepreneurs involved in it, right? Like the ISOS program embeds real world entrepreneurs. should any of those entrepreneurs actually be teaching the course? I don't know. Yeah, they have the experience of being successful entrepreneurs. Their stories matter to the course. And same with our, our entrepreneurs in our local community. They have to be in those courses sharing because they have the real world experience, and they are the people that students often relate to the most. So again, like being a strong facilitator in the classroom, but making sure that you actually have entrepreneurs who are part of your entrepreneurship programming.
Yeah. Yeah.
And not only that, but you're able to extract from them the knowledge that they might not know that they know. Gary talks about this a lot. People often don't know what they know. They had the learning, it got them where they needed to go, and then they sometimes forget about it. They forget about the nugget of wisdom from the failure once they found something to replicate and keep moving forward on. So it's about kind of extracting that in a positive way, in a collaborative way, through, as you both have been talking about a lot now, facilitation rather than dictation.
And I think too, like that tacit knowledge, like we saw that come out during some trainings. When an entrepreneur goes through the Eli training, sometimes they're overwhelmed by feel like the how they've always been was just explained to them, like they didn't even realize why they were entrepreneurial or what it meant to have that mindset. But it's like real self-discovery for them as well.
I love that, Bree. I mean, I've said that before, that through opportunity discovery, self-discovery occurs, right? It's I'm always struggling to articulate this idea, Bree, but it's like there's two things here we're talking about. We're talking about entrepreneurship. Like we all live by exchanging useful things with each other. So the question becomes, what is the useful thing that you exchange? With whom do you exchange it? How do you learn how to become useful to other humans? Those are the questions that are designed to evoke our deeply held beliefs that we are influencing our behavior without our awareness, which brings the mindset concept up, right? So if you take this idea of entrepreneurship and the idea of mindset and put them together, and I think what entrepreneurial mindset education we're asking our students to do, Bree, is to not only recognize that we're looking at the world and ourselves through a lens, and we're probably doing that uncritically.
Right.
And the idea of entrepreneurial mindset education is to step back and look at the lens itself. That's the mindset component of it, if that makes any sense.
And there's so much to unpack actually with entrepreneurial mindset, but we can't ever forget at the core of the mindset is that it's our underlying beliefs and assumptions that we all have. And part of having an entrepreneurial mindset is that we're constantly challenging those assumptions. That's what entrepreneurial people do. If you read, I recommend Adam Grant's book, Think Again, because it's really on that, like people who can constantly challenge their assumptions. And experts aren't very good at this because they have a very strong belief system in what they know, and they've developed this expertise, but sometimes ongoing, kind of challenging of those assumptions can be harder when you're rooted in this kind of concept around being an expert of something, right?
There's actually a lot of a large body of work developing around that concept of cognitive entrenchment, where the more you know about something, the less agile you are to think about it in different ways when, I've run into a problem where it's not really working anymore.
Yeah. In times of change, it's like that's what the experts struggle to adapt more so than a novice. It's really interesting, which is why you see in the entrepreneurship literature and the research, like the entrepreneurs so frequently, they have little or no experience in their chosen endeavor. It's like the naivete actually works for their advantage, right? Because they're not cognitively entrenched in a way of thinking. They're more open-minded, let's say.
And Gary, I would liken that to where this whole conversation started. I showed up in an entrepreneurship training. I had no entrepreneurship training in my past. I heard something you were saying, and I found a different way to apply it to solve a problem that I saw that was significant. And that led into the evolution of ISO Student Success Program, which I helped lead a team of curriculum developers to create. Now, I would never say like, I'm an entrepreneur, but I think I might be entrepreneurial.
That's a great point, Bree. That's a great point, right? You don't
have no
have
experience in that, but I saw an opportunity and I ran with it and took maybe some risks along the way, but I think we ended up creating some real value in the world from it.
Yeah. That's the big idea here, Bree. It's really to help students and adults.
Can I comment on something Willie said in here too?
I was just going to call that out because it fits so perfectly with what y'all are talking about. Go ahead, Bree.
So there's some mention in there about confidence development. And what I would say is, when you allow students to get engaged in opportunity discovery, you give them self-efficacy moments. They're just those little moments that help build that confidence to see that they could believe more in themselves to achieve the goals they set out for themselves, right? And that for all of us, like we're all working on self-efficacy, and trying to have those different moments like, okay, well, I did that speaking engagement. Maybe I could go to a bigger speaking engagement, or maybe I could be, and that is a key outcome of entrepreneurial learning, is developing self-efficacy. When we hear from the entrepreneurs, they tend to have really high levels of self-efficacy. They weren't scared to just try. They believed they might be able to achieve that goal. But for someone who kind of starts on the lower end of confidence and self-efficacy, which can also be domain specific, right? We've talked about that before. Like you might have low self-efficacy in one domain and really high in another. In order to develop it, you have to have at least some kind of self-efficacy moment to build a little bit of confidence to believe that you might be able to achieve a little bit more. Huge outcome of entrepreneurship.
Yeah. That's sort of, I've been thinking about like Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. Like, what can you do right now without assistance from another? And the next ring out is what can you do with guidance or encouragement from another? And then what's the third zone out is what you're not capable of right now. But that just keeps expanding. But the question, Willie, the confidence question really brings forth another interesting point that I'd like to bring up that I kind of riff on Jerome Brunner's idea of discovery learning, is that the greatest obstacle to growth is either the belief that opportunities do not exist or that one is not capable. And yet these ideas land in our brain. They become deeply held assumptions that we take for granted, but we're not even aware that they're there. And I think that's important for all of us to hear, right? That those are the barriers. And to your point, Bree, and you've seen this over and over and over again, and Willie, as you have, once people become aroused to the notion that opportunities do exist in your ambient environment and that you are in fact capable, now our job as educators becomes not only much easier, but much more rewarding. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is the role of entrepreneurship education, to expose people to the relatable social models. If you're dealing with people that have lower self-efficacy, stop talking about Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, for God's sakes. Expose them to people that they can relate to that are succeeding in this domain. That's another, I think, important component to think about. Nick, are we fresh out of comments? Because
I was just scrolling up to make sure that there weren't any that we didn't at least touch on. And I think we're good. But Gary, go ahead with whatever you wanted to say.
No, I'm just very excited about that idea. Like, that's ultimately the problem we're trying to solve. And the question I'd like to ask students is, what is preventing you from making yourself more useful to more humans? That's the question I want to ask to everyone on this webinar. That's a question that addresses Sajad's question, right? About how do you teach entrepreneurship if you've never been a successful entrepreneur? What is stopping you from making yourself more useful to more humans? And I want to be clear about this, and this is sort of the big, back to the liberal arts thing. The way I think about entrepreneurship is it's not about dropping out of school, quitting your job, mortgaging your house, and going all in. It's about continuing to preserve the core of what you have, but using your discretionary time, effort, and resources to explore new ways to make yourself more useful in whatever way you can. Because the more useful you become, the better off you're going to be, the more engaged you're likely to be, the more psychological well-being you're likely to experience, the more economic gains you're likely to experience. It's sort of that's how I think about it anyway.
I would add one comment. I saw a post in there about an ed tech company being started, being told it wouldn't work, and then now it's landed a grant and some employees. I think entrepreneurial people just have a different response when they're told no. They have a different explanatory style, right? This is kind of the resiliency of hitting roadblocks that Seligman talks about. Is how do you explain the no to yourself? Is that, is it permanent, pervasive? It means like it's, end all, there's no moving forward. That's kind of a pessimistic response to it, or is it more optimistic? And this is, local and temporary, and I can overcome it. An entrepreneurial person doesn't even always hear the word no. They're just like, oh, just a different avenue, right? Like, I just have to find a different avenue. If you believe in it, like if you really believe in the vision of it and you can see something that other people can't see, well, we know in the transformation theory, right, Gary, like the curve, like you're going to have your innovators, early adopters, early majority, and you have to always recognize the late majority and laggards because they exist in every organization around every idea. You don't let those people stop you. You're just like, oh yeah, you're not really the early adopter or the early majority I'm looking for. Now that's maybe not, it's not that every idea is a good one. I mean, some, like if you're really collecting, doing the discovery process and getting feedback that you're not creating value, that's different. Maybe an idea does go to die, but you don't kind of let the no's stop you, right? Like you find entrepreneurial people will just keep pushing forward and finding different avenues or different early adopters to move it forward.
Yeah, it's a double-sided coin though, Bree, because like, I want to be sure make this nuanced point that you're not just mindlessly clinging to an idea in spite of feedback.
Exactly.
And the trick is, this goes back to my, the scientific method. You micro experiment your way forward. And if you're going to get knocked off course by one person telling you that's a bad idea, that's a problem. But I love the idea of, find one friend. If you can't convince a friend to pursue the idea with you, it's probably a horrible idea.
Right.
But to find a friend and look for the evidence, see where does the evidence take you? And on our podcast, Bree, a couple of months ago, I interviewed a guy that I met in Athens, Greece in 2014, entrepreneur Giannis. And it's a really interesting episode because he spent an inordinate amount of time understanding the problem. And I really came away from that episode. Maybe Nick, you can post a link to that particular episode in the show notes here. But it speaks to like this Einsteinian idea of, if I had to, save the world, I would, in an hour, I'd take 55 minutes to understand the problem and 5 minutes designing a solution. And I think too often the nascent entrepreneur becomes enamored of her idea and starts rushing down the execution path before diagnosing, and that can really be problematic, which is why I come back to the scientific method. It really starts with a deep dive in understanding the problem, as Christensen says, not just from a practical perspective, but to understand the social and emotional, as well as the functional dimension of the human need that you're trying to fulfill.
And sorry, I stepped away from the computer for a moment and I heard you ask for a link to something, Gary. What was that to?
I forgot already. What did I ask for a link to? Oh, the podcast, The Honest.
Yeah.
Oh, yep.
The
Got it.
interview.
The
Yeah.
podcast.
I just shared in the chat as well. There was a couple questions early on about Concordia's liberal arts. If anyone wants to take a look at it, we have the goals of liberal arts learning and, kind of the broader definition there. And then some things on Brew as well. If they just were looking for an example of a liberal arts approach to education as well. So.
Yeah, and Nick, and maybe, for those of you who are interested, a lot of the work we do are train people how to teach entrepreneurship. And we have about 4 public trainings each year. Our next public trainings in February. Thousands of educators, more than 3,000 educators from across the planet have completed this training. Next one's in February. Nick, if you put a link there.
Yep.
We also come to colleges to do training, on site. Bree and I got to go do this together in Cape Town in South Africa a couple of years ago, which was really a phenomenal opportunity. We met a lot of interesting folks there. So if you're interested in learning how to bring entrepreneurship into liberal arts education, that's one thing you could do.
Yeah, and for folks on the call, I'm interested in engaging with other directors of entrepreneurship. I have a great connection with higher education directors throughout Minnesota in the private institutions through Governor Walz's initiative called Launch Minnesota. They do a great job that's part of the ecosystem in Minnesota. So I get to learn, and it's interesting. They have different challenges that I don't have, but then they're doing things that I would like to be doing. And so one thing I'm really working on is I would love to have students engaged in startup internships. Our Economic Development Corporation here did fund some startup internships so students can see what it's like to work in that startup environment and kind of wear different hats and how exciting that is. And have that exposure, but at the state level, they're not funded. So, there's so many different areas of entrepreneurship. And I think we're all trying to tackle sometimes similar and different problems, or maybe we have solutions we can share with each other. So I say all that to please reach out. Let's schedule a call and would love to hear. You've heard a lot about what Concordia is doing and maybe relate to some of it. Maybe you have some nuggets to offer me as well. So I'd love to connect with you.
Awesome. Nick, any further questions? We're just about run out of time. I know a lot of folks are dropping off, that people are busy. They got to jump on the next Zoom call and whatever. Bree, this has been a fabulous conversation. I feel like we could go on for hours talking about this, and maybe we'll come back and do a part 2 in 2022. Well, I think there's a lot of interest in I think you're blazing new ground in the liberal arts. So and maybe we can come back and do a part 2 sometime next year.
Yeah, would love it. We didn't even get into all the kind of community outreach that we're doing with entrepreneurship as well and partnerships. So, maybe external, I do internal work across the campus, but I have an external role too. So maybe that's a different topic for another day.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah. Connecting to the community. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, yeah, let's, I think we're at the end of our time here. Thank you everyone for attending. Bree, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to share with us and join us in this engaging conversation. Thanks for all your comments, all your participation. Nick will send everyone the chat and the follow-up and the recorded. Yep. We'll post it on our YouTube channel and so forth. So thanks everyone. Thanks for being here, and hope to chat with all of you again soon.
Thank you guys. Great to see you and hear from you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.